I was sitting on the velvet couch in my son's living room, cradling a cup of peppermint tea and watching the twinkle of their 10-foot Christmas tree, when I made a simple suggestion. "I could bring my maple roasted turkey this year," I said with a smile. "Nathan always loved that one. Remember how your dad used to sneak bites before dinner?" I looked over at Nathan, my only child, hoping to see that familiar warmth in his eyes, but instead, he shifted uncomfortably, running his hand along the seam of the cushion. His jaw clenched. There was a long pause before he finally said it. "Mom, you're not going to be joining us for Christmas this year." The words didn't make sense at first. I blinked, thinking maybe I had misheard. "What do you mean?" He looked away, fixing his gaze on the fireplace I'd helped pay to install last spring. The same one Whitney insisted on having for the holiday ambience. I remembered writing the check like it was yesterday. "Whitney's parents are coming this year," he said, softer now. "And they asked that things be kept a certain way. You know how they are about tradition. She thought it would be simpler if..." He didn't finish the sentence. My throat tightened. "Simpler if what?" I asked. "If I stayed away?" He nodded, barely perceptible. "It's not personal, Mom. They're used to a different atmosphere." A different atmosphere. I glanced around the room. The silk curtains, the gleaming hardwood floors, the crown molding along the ceiling. I had paid for all of it. Every inch of this home had my fingerprints on it. Every mortgage payment, every renovation, every emergency bill that Whitney and Nathan had ever brought to me in desperation. "Not personal," I echoed. "But you're asking me not to come to Christmas." He winced. "Maybe we can celebrate another day, just the two of us." As if Christmas was something you could reschedule like a dentist appointment. I stood slowly, brushing imaginary crumbs from my lap. My heart was hammering in my chest, but my voice stayed calm. "Well," I said, walking toward the door, "tell your in-laws I said Merry Christmas. Or however they prefer it." I didn't look back as I stepped out into the cold December air. The sky was the color of steel, and the wind stung my cheeks. Behind me, I heard the door shut quietly. Firm. Final. I sat in my car, staring at the house I had helped build where my presence was no longer welcome. I didn't cry. I just started the engine and drove. The drive home was quiet, the kind of quiet that settled in your bones. As I passed through the neighborhoods of Oak Ridge, every corner reminded me of a version of myself I used to be. The woman who believed family meant showing up. The one who would have gladly given her last dollar to make her son's life easier. And I had. 5 years ago, when Nathan and Whitney found the house of their dreams, a 3-bedroom colonial with high ceilings and a wrap-around porch, they were short on the down payment. Whitney called me in tears. "It's perfect, Evelyn, but we're just $10,000 short." 10,000 turned into 25 once the inspection revealed plumbing issues. Then came the appliances, the granite countertops, the floors that needed to be hardwood to match the neighborhood. I dipped into Charles's life insurance, the money he'd wanted me to use for retirement, for travel, for peace. Instead, I handed it over with a smile. Nathan promised they'd pay me back, but they never did, and when the mortgage payments became too steep, I offered to help. What started as a one-time favor turned into a monthly automatic transfer. $2,600 every month, for 5 years. I gave up vacations, skipped dental appointments, wore shoes until the soles gave out, ate peanut butter on toast for dinner more times than I could count. All because I believed helping my son build his life was the right thing to do. But slowly, I disappeared from that life. First, it was not being asked to join them on their trip to the coast too crowded, Mom, and we really need couple time. Then it was Thanksgiving hosted at Whitney's parents' cabin. They've had it planned for months. Eventually, even Sunday dinners stopped. I'd call. Sometimes they'd answer. Most times, I left cheerful voicemails that were never returned. Still, I kept sending the money. Because that's what mothers do, right? We give, we forgive, we wait for them to remember. But sitting in my quiet house that night, staring at the cracked kitchen tiles I couldn't afford to replace, I realized something. They weren't going to remember. To Nathan and Whitney, I had become invisible, a silent wallet, a background fixture, convenient when needed, unnecessary when not. And now I wasn't even welcome for Christmas. Not even for one night, not even after everything. That's when it hit me, not just the hurt, but the truth. This wasn't family, this was extraction. And it had to end. The next morning, I was rinsing out my coffee mug when my phone rang. Whitney. I stared at the screen for a second before answering. Maybe, just maybe, this was her calling to make things right, to apologize for how things had unfolded the night before. But the moment I heard her voice, I knew better. Evelyn, she said, brisk and businesslike, I just wanted to touch base. There seems to be some lingering tension from yesterday. Tension, I repeated, my voice flat. Yes, I understand you may have taken things personally, but I hope you'll see this from our perspective. My parents are traditional. They expect a certain tone during the holidays. It's nothing against you, it's just about creating the right environment. I gripped the edge of the sink. The right environment, I said quietly. You mean one that doesn't include me? Well, she continued, you do tend to bring a different energy. The food you make, the stories you tell, it's a bit heavy for the holidays. I blinked. You mean the roasted turkey and cranberry stuffing I made every year while you were unemployed? Whitney chuckled softly, as if I'd said something charmingly outdated. Back then we appreciated it, but now that things are more stable, we're trying to elevate our gatherings. Elevate. The word sliced through me like ice. She kept talking. My parents enjoy refined conversation, current affairs, literature, wine pairings. I'm not saying you don't have value, Evelyn, just that it's not quite the right fit anymore. My hands trembled. I see. So I'm not refined enough, not polished, is that it? It's not personal, it's cultural in a way. Class-based. I mean, well, you were a schoolteacher, right? And Charles was, what, a handyman? Contractor, I said sharply. Yes, of course. A very useful trade. And I'm sure he was proud of it. But my parents operate in different circles. They summer in Nantucket. My mother's on the board of the local arts council. And I said slowly, am the woman who paid for the house you're living in. Who has sent you thousands every month for 5 years? Who held your hand when you thought your first pregnancy was a miscarriage? There was silence. Then Whitney said, coolly, that doesn't entitle you to disrupt our holidays, Evelyn. Generosity doesn't give you access. It never has. That was it. That was the moment I felt the shift. The quiet line between being needed and being discarded had been crossed. Thank you for clarifying, I said calmly. Evelyn, wait. But I had already ended the call. I placed the phone on the counter, stood there for a long minute, then walked to the desk in the hallway and opened the drawer I had ignored for far too long. Inside was a manila folder. Bank statements, wire receipts, 5 years of silence. Time to start speaking. I spread the documents across the kitchen table like evidence at a trial. Bank statements, highlighted transfers, printed receipts with my notes in the margins. I hadn't really looked at them in years. I couldn't. It was too painful. But now they stared back at me, quiet witnesses to a pattern I could no longer ignore. The numbers were sobering. $2,600. Every single month. 60 months. $156,000. And that wasn't counting the down payment, or the furniture Whitney insisted they needed to host her book club, not counting the stainless steel appliances I financed when their old ones clashed with the aesthetic, not counting the property tax check I wrote after Whitney had maxed out their budget planning her parents' anniversary weekend. I had said yes to everything. Not because I was weak, but because I loved my son, because I thought if I gave enough, forgave enough, I'd be allowed to stay close. But generosity had become expectation. And expectation had turned to entitlement. I picked up my phone, heart racing but steady, and called my bank. The same one I'd walked into 5 years ago to set up the transfer back when I still believed it was temporary. After 2 minutes of automated prompts, a real voice answered. Good afternoon, this is Julie at Pine Federal. How can I help you today? I need to cancel an automatic monthly transfer, I said. Certainly. May I have your account number? I read off the numbers and listened as she typed. All right, I see a transfer of $2,600. Going to a Wells Fargo mortgage account, ending in 9142. How long have you been making that payment? 5 years, I said. And you'd like to cancel it effective immediately? I looked around my kitchen, the faded curtains, the chipped backsplash, the refrigerator held shut with duct tape. I thought of the winter coat I hadn't replaced in 8 years, the dental crown I'd put off, the trips I never took. Yes, I said clearly, effective immediately. Done, she said after a few clicks. The transfer has been cancelled. Is there anything else I can assist you with? No, I replied. That's everything. I hung up the phone and exhaled slowly. For the first time in years, I felt something unfamiliar. Relief. Not just financial, but emotional, like I had finally walked out of a room where I'd been holding my breath far too long. I gathered up the statements, receipts, and printed photos. I carried them to the fireplace, struck a match, and watched them burn. A 5-year ritual of self-erasure, now rising as smoke. The warmth on my face felt earned. And the silence in the room was no longer empty. It was mine. 3 days later, my name appeared in the local paper. It was a Sunday morning, and I was enjoying the small pleasure of a warm kitchen and a cup of decent coffee. The first time in years, I'd splurged on the good Colombian roast when I saw it. Page 3, Lifestyle section. Local woman strands elderly guests at airport during holiday weekend. My stomach turned. There it was. My name, my face. An old headshot from my school district's website, 5 years out of date and poorly lit. The article described how I had abandoned Whitney's parents at the Spokane International Airport during a winter storm. Winter storm. It had been sunny and 48 degrees. According to the article, Catherine and Thomas Ellison, Whitney's parents, had waited in freezing conditions for nearly 4 hours after I failed to pick them up for a pre-arranged ride. They'd been distressed, vulnerable, and shaken by the experience. Catherine was quoted saying, "We just never imagined someone would treat family like that." I nearly dropped the mug. No mention, of course, that I had been uninvited from Christmas dinner. No mention that Whitney had told me I was no longer a fit for their holiday aesthetic. No mention of the 5 years of mortgage payments, or the fact that they hadn't asked me to pick anyone up. They demanded it, less than 24 hours after cutting me out. The piece was signed by a writer I didn't recognize, Monica Barrett, lifestyle editor, but I recognized the fingerprints. Whitney's father, Thomas, was a retired investment banker. He'd spent his entire career sitting on non-profit boards, shaking hands at Rotary Club lunches, and speaking at fundraising galas. He knew exactly who to call and what buttons to press. The whole article reeked of strategy. They weren't just trying to punish me, they were trying to destroy my name. To make sure if anyone in our community ever heard Evelyn Brooks, they'd think of a petty, unstable woman who left 2 helpless retirees stranded in a blizzard that never happened. It was surgical, clean, quiet. They didn't yell. They didn't confront me directly. They simply rewrote the narrative. But what they didn't realize, what they never imagined, was that I had been silent for so long, I'd learned how to listen. And in listening, I'd learned exactly where their weak spots were. I folded the paper neatly. I placed it beside my coffee cup. Then I got up, walked to my desk, and opened my laptop. If they wanted to go public, I'd show them what the truth looked like, printed, documented, undeniable. War, as it turned out, was a language I now spoke fluently. Christmas Eve arrived cold and glittering, the kind of evening meant for fireplaces and second helpings of pie. But I had other plans. I dressed carefully, my best navy wool coat, black gloves, a silver brooch that had belonged to my mother. In my hands, a simple leather satchel filled with truth. Inside were 12 neatly labeled folders. Each one contained the full record, bank transfers, receipts, photos of the house renovations, the article from the newspaper, and my handwritten notes in red ink beside every lie. I pulled up to Brandon and Whitney's house just after 6:30 p.m. The windows glowed gold. Laughter spilled into the street. Cars lined the driveway and stretched along the curb. The kind of gathering I used to be invited to. Not this year. I stepped out into the cold, crossed the street, and walked right up to the front door. It was unlocked. Of course it was. Whitney always liked to brag about how safe their neighborhood was. "We don't even need to lock up," she once told me with a wink. "Not like other parts of town." I stepped inside. Their dining room was alive with warmth and movement. A dozen guests sat around a long table covered in candles and linen. Whitney stood pouring wine into tall glasses, her laugh a perfect melody of hosting grace. Until she saw me. The room went still. "Evelyn," Whitney said, her smile frozen in place, "I'm sorry, but this is a private." I held up a hand. "I won't stay long, I just came to deliver something." I walked calmly around the table, placing one folder in front of each guest. Some looked confused, others curious. Brandon sat at the far end, frozen in place, his fork hovering above his plate. "What is this?" asked a woman in pearls. "Documentation," I said evenly, "of the last 5 years of my financial support, of the payments I made on this house, of the renovations, the bills, the gifts, and of the article printed about me 3 days ago." Someone opened a folder. Pages began to rustle, eyebrows furrowed. The mood shifted from festive to uncertain. Whitney recovered quickly. "This is completely inappropriate. She's twisting everything." She volunteered to help. "We never asked her to." "I have the email," I interrupted, pulling out a printed copy. "From you, Whitney. Dated February 3rd, 2019. Asking if I could help with the down payment, and promising to make it up to me soon." Whitney's face paled. A man at the table looked up. "This says you've paid over $200,000 for their house." I nodded. 215,000 to be exact. Over 5 years. "Jesus," someone whispered. "And the newspaper article," I continued, "was planted by Whitney's father. He has connections at the paper. Used them to spread a lie that I abandoned them during a storm that didn't exist." A guest opened the article. My notes were highlighted clearly: temperature that day, time of the supposed pickup, timestamps from text messages. Brandon finally found his voice. "Mom, this isn't the time." "It is exactly the time," I said, "because you told me I wasn't welcome here, that I didn't belong. But you used my money, you built this life with my sacrifices, and then you shut the door in my face." The woman in pearls looked at Whitney. "Did you really tell your mother-in-law she wasn't refined enough for Christmas dinner?" Whitney's voice broke. "It was more complicated than that." "No," I said. "It was very simple. I wasn't good enough for your show, but I was good enough to fund it." Silence. A long, aching silence. I turned toward the door. "I won't keep you from your meal. I just thought your guests deserved to know who actually paid for the wine you're drinking." Then I walked out, leaving a room full of stunned faces behind me. Outside, the air was sharp and honest. And for the first time in years, I felt warm. It was a Tuesday in March when the letter came. Certified mail. Heavy envelope. Legal tone in every line. I signed for it at the door, holding it like something fragile and radioactive. Inside, notice of default. 3 months of missed mortgage payments had caught up with Brandon and Whitney. The total owed $7,800. 14 days to bring the account current or face foreclosure proceedings. I set the letter aside and poured myself a cup of tea. Not out of indifference but clarity. For the first time in years, it wasn't my problem to fix. My phone had rung a few times over the past weeks, numbers I recognized but didn't answer. Whitney's name. Then a blocked caller. Probably her parents. Even a voicemail from Brandon that I hadn't brought myself to listen to. 97 days since Christmas Eve. And then, that Thursday evening, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Brandon standing on my porch, his suit wrinkled, hair unkempt, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. He looked like a man who hadn't slept well in months. "Hi, Mom," he said softly. I stepped aside without a word and let him in. He looked around the house like he was seeing it for the first time. The new curtains I'd bought, the fresh paint on the walls, the dining chairs I'd finally replaced after 15 years. All paid for with the money I used to send to him. "It looks nice," he said. "I know." We sat in silence for a moment before he spoke again. "I came to say I'm sorry." I didn't respond, so he went on. Not just for Christmas, for everything. For the way Whitney treated you, for not standing up for you, for letting her family erase you. My jaw tightened, he noticed. They talked about you, Mom. Behind your back. About how you didn't fit in. About how Dad was just a contractor. How you should be grateful to be near people with class. And you listened, I said. He nodded. I did. I was stupid. Weak. And I let them shape how I saw you. I let them decide your worth. His voice cracked. I've lost everything, haven't I? I studied his face. My son. The boy I once read bedtime stories to. The man who now looked like a stranger. You didn't lose me, Brandon, I said quietly. You gave me away. There's a difference. He closed his eyes for a moment. Is there any way to fix this? I forgave you a long time ago, I said, but forgiveness doesn't mean returning to how things were. He nodded. I'm not here to ask for money, he said. Just a second chance. Not with the house. With you. I leaned back in my chair. If you want that, you'll have to earn it, with honesty, with effort, not with apologies. He looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time in a long while, I saw my son again. Not the man Whitney shaped, but the one I raised. Spring arrived quietly in Spokane. The trees bloomed like they'd been waiting for a reason. The air smelled different, lighter, cleaner. Or maybe I had just started noticing things again. I was no longer sending money into a void. I wasn't waiting by the phone for a holiday invitation that would never come. I wasn't pretending that being excluded was somehow noble or selfless. I was living. It started with little things. I replaced my refrigerator, the old one had rattled for years. Bought myself a proper reading chair. Finally got the cracked window in the guest room repaired. I planted herbs in the kitchen sill, something Charles and I had always talked about but never quite did. With every repair, every update, every meal I made just for myself, I reclaimed something. Then came the call from Ava. She wasn't blood, not technically. She was my former neighbor's granddaughter, now a single mom with 2 kids and a heart bigger than her apartment. She'd stopped by around Thanksgiving with a pie and stayed for hours. We talked about life, grief, mistakes, and the odd comfort of starting over. Would you come for dinner this Sunday? She asked one afternoon. The kids want to show you their art projects. They still talk about your cinnamon rolls. And so I did. That Sunday turned into a tradition. Dinners with laughter and sticky fingers, fridge drawings, puzzles on the living room rug. No one judged me for using paper plates. No one asked what I earned or where I summered. They were just glad I was there. One evening, as Ava's daughter wrapped her arms around my waist and called me Grandma Evelyn, I felt something in my chest loosen. Not regret, not longing. Relief. Love didn't need permission. Family didn't need blood. Respect didn't require begging. Sitting on my porch that evening, a cup of tea in hand, I thought about Brandon. We talked occasionally now, carefully, slowly. He was learning, I could tell, not just about money or marriage but about people, and how easily they disappear when you stop seeing them. There was no going back, but there might still be a path forward on firmer ground this time. As for me, I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for validation, not for invitations, not for someone to see my worth. Because I'd seen it. Finally. And I wasn't going to forget it again. So if you ever find yourself sitting alone at Christmas, wondering what you did wrong, I hope you remember this. Sometimes being left out isn't rejection. It's redirection. Toward the life and the people who actually want you there.